Friends, happy holidays to everyone. Today we have a special tank for you called Christmas Tree. In the 1950s, France created a tank that weighed as much as 3 passenger cars, stood 1.5 meters tall, and had armor like a tin can. Any machine gun could pierce it right through. And you know what French engineers decided to put on it? 4 huge 120 millimeters caliber cannons, 4 barrels, on a machine the size of a larder. But that's not even the craziest part of this story. The craziest part is why they even created this monster, and why the military seriously considered it for combat operations. It all started on one black day when the great French colonial empire began to crumble before everyone's eyes. May 7th, 1954, northern Vietnam, Dien Bien Phu Valley. After 54 days of bloody siege, the French garrison capitulated. Over 10,000 French soldiers surrendered to Vietnamese partisans. Elite Foreign Legion paratroopers, considered invincible, were defeated by a peasant army in flip-flops. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a humiliation of a great colonial power. France had been fighting in Indochina for 8 years since 1946. Thousands of dead soldiers, billions of francs in military expenditure, endless government promises of imminent victory, and it all collapsed in one moment. On May 7, Vietnamese soldiers raised the red flag over the French command post at Dien Bien Phu. On May 8, negotiations began in Geneva on France's capitulation and withdrawal of troops from Indochina. French society was in shock. A country that considered itself a great power had lost a war to partisans. France's prestige on the international stage collapsed, but the worst was yet to come. Just 6 months after the humiliating defeat at Dien Bien Phu, a new catastrophe struck. On the night of November 1, 1954, explosions rang out simultaneously across Algeria. The National Liberation Front attacked French military bases, administrative buildings and police stations in different parts of the country. This wasn't just a series of terrorist attacks, it was a declaration of war. The Algerians chose the moment perfectly. Combat units were still in Vietnam, awaiting evacuation after the defeat. The President of the Council of Ministers of France was on a state visit to Canada. The metropolis itself was preparing for a visit by the Emperor of Ethiopia. French intelligence knew about the planned uprising. They even knew the approximate timing, end of 1954. But the rebels struck earlier than scheduled, when France was maximally disorganized. France was burning from both ends. Indochina was lost definitively. Algeria was on fire. Morocco and Tunisia were beginning to demand independence. The colonial empire, which had been built for over 100 years, was crumbling before their eyes. What do you think happened next? French military command frantically searched for a solution on how to control vast territories with limited forces, how to quickly transfer troops to wherever an uprising broke out. The regular army operated too slowly. While reinforcements were pulled in by sea, while bases were deployed, while supply was organized, weeks and months passed. During this time, rebels managed to entrench themselves, gain population support, and create fortified areas. Mobile rapid reaction forces were needed, troops that could be transferred to any point of the empire within hours. And the solution seemed obvious: airborne assault. Transport aircraft could be on the other side of the world in one night, drop fighters with parachutes, and immediately begin operations. No ports needed, no airfields with concrete runways needed, no months of preparation. Jump with a parachute and straight into battle. But paratroopers have a fundamental problem. They jump from the sky lightly equipped. Rifles, machine guns, grenades, anti-tank grenade launchers, that's all their armament. You can't drop heavy equipment by parachute. Anti-tank guns, mortars, artillery had to be delivered separately after landing, when transport planes could land. But what if the enemy meets the paratroopers with tanks? Grenade launchers are ineffective against armored vehicles. You need to get dangerously close. Anti-tank rifles were outdated, and then something happened that no one expected. Someone at the French Ministry of Defense put forward an idea that at first glance seemed brilliant, and on second thought absolutely insane. What if we dropped tanks along with the paratroopers? Light airborne tanks that could be loaded into a transport aircraft, dropped on parachutes, and immediately put into battle. On paper, this looked like a solution to all problems. Paratroopers get heavy weapons right at the moment of landing. No need to wait for reinforcements. No need to look for an airfield to land transporters with equipment. Drop the tank by parachute. The crew climbs inside and you can fight. The military got excited about this idea. Imagine, at night over Algeria, transport planes fly by, dropping paratroopers, and tanks follow on huge parachute systems. The rebels think they're dealing with light infantry, and half an hour after the landing, they're already being attacked by armored vehicles. But the most interesting part began when engineers started calculating. Specialists quickly understood the scale of the catastrophe. French transport aircraft of the mid-50s physically couldn't lift a regular tank. Even the lightest tank of that time weighed too much. After long calculations, they determined a maximum of 6 tons, in extreme cases 8. That's the weight of 3 passenger cars. Now imagine the task. You need to fit into this weight everything that makes a tank a tank. Armor capable of protecting against bullets and shrapnel. A gun capable of destroying enemy tanks. Ammunition, engine, fuel, transmission, tracks, guidance system, observation devices, and 3 crew members with their equipment. Physics is merciless. If you make a tank light enough for transportation, it will be pierced by a heavy machine gun. If you give it normal armor, it becomes too heavy for the aircraft. If you install a powerful gun, it takes up half the volume of the machine and weighs several tons together with ammunition. If you economize on armament, the tank turns into a useless target that will be destroyed by the first enemy tank it encounters. Any sane engineer would say, this is impossible. You can't fool the laws of physics. You can't create a tank of this weight that will be protected from fire and capable of fighting armored vehicles. This contradicts common sense. But French military didn't care about common sense. The empire was burning. In Algeria, French soldiers were dying every day. An urgent solution was needed, any solution. And in December 1954, just a month after the start of the Algerian War, the French Ministry of Defense officially launched the Engin Léger de Combat program. Light Combat Vehicle, abbreviated ELC. The technical requirements were harsh to the point of absurdity. Combat weight, no more than 8 tons. Ability to destroy enemy tanks at distances up to 1,500 meters. Complete crew protection from bullets and shrapnel. High movement speed. Excellent maneuverability. Ability to be transported in a transport aircraft and dropped on parachutes. The military was essentially demanding the impossible. They wanted to get a full-fledged tank destroyer, weighing as much as a few small cars. They wanted this tank to fly on a parachute. They wanted its armor to protect the crew. They wanted it to destroy Soviet heavy tanks at 1.5 kilometers. And they were absolutely serious. The program was launched on a competitive basis. The Ministry of Defense announced that any French company could present its project. Let the engineers themselves rack their brains on how to combine the incompatible. Let them solve how to fool the laws of physics. The main thing was that by the end of the 50s, France would have an airborne tank. And you know what? There were daredevils who took on this insane task. There were engineers who decided they could create what was impossible to create. There were companies that believed that French genius and ingenuity would defeat stubborn physics. What do you think it all ended with? 2 completely different companies decided to compete for the contract. On one side, the industrial giant AMX with many years of experience and all resources. On the other, Brunon-Valette, a small firm from a provincial town. But the most interesting part began when both presented their solutions, because the approaches turned out to be diametrically opposed. AMX decided to go the path of extreme minimalism. Their logic was ironclad. If the tank must weigh 6 tons and destroy enemy armored vehicles, then it needs to be made so small that the enemy simply can't hit it. An invisible ghost on the battlefield. Engineers created a machine only 1,430 millimeter high to the turret roof. That's below human height. The Soviet light amphibious tank T-38 was taller. Body length 3,750 millimeters, shorter than a modern sedan. To squeeze everything necessary into such dimensions, they had to make monstrous sacrifices. The driver was placed in the turret in a lying position right together with the commander. The engine was placed in front. Fuel tank in back. Crew in the middle in a turret the size of a phone booth. The conditions for the crew turned out so terrible that the military called them inhumane. The driver lay in the turret, looking through periscopic devices. In traveling mode, he still remained there. There was nowhere to get out. In combat position, it got even worse. What do you think happened next? They tried to fix the situation, redid the layout, returned to a two-man turret where the commander and gunner sat more or less normally. But this only confirmed the main point. It's impossible to create a full-fledged tank weighing 6 tons without monstrous compromises. But Bruno and Valette went a completely different way, and then something happened that no one expected. Engineers proposed a revolutionary concept, a modular platform. The idea was simple and genius at the same time. Why create 10 different tanks when you can make one base chassis and change combat modules on top? The base chassis remains unchanged. Tracks, engine, transmission, hull armor, and different turrets with various armaments are installed on top. Today you need an anti-tank gun. Install one turret. Tomorrow you need automatic cannons against infantry. Change to another. The day after tomorrow you need an anti-aircraft installation. Install a third. The military got excited about this idea instantly. Imagine the savings. One tank performs 5 different roles. Logistics are simplified many times over. All spare parts for the chassis are the same. Production becomes cheaper. No need to make 5 different factory lines. Crew training is easier. Drivers and mechanics work with one platform. The concept of modularity was so advanced for the 50s that the military immediately approved continuation of development. Bruno and Valette got the green light to create several armament variants for a unified chassis. Work began on the ELC family of vehicles. The base chassis was designed with consideration for installing various turrets, hull height about 1.5 meters, length just under 4 meters. Chassis weight with crew about 6.5 tons, engine 160 horsepower, maximum speed 70 kilometers per hour. Armoring was minimal, but this was considered an acceptable compromise. 15 millimeters in front, 10 millimeters on the sides and rear. Any heavy machine gun could pierce it through. High explosive fragmentation shells turned the armor into a sieve. But engineers bet on something else: speed, maneuverability, and firepower. The idea was that the tank shouldn't receive hits at all. It's too fast, too small, too inconspicuous. The enemies simply won't have time to aim before receiving a salvo from powerful weapons. And now the most interesting part. While AMX struggled with crew placement in a tiny hull, Bruno and Valette calmly developed several armament variants for its platform, and each successive variant became more insane. The military observed both developments with interest. Experienced giant versus bold provincial firm, technological minimalism versus revolutionary modularity, extreme compactness versus versatility. In 1957, AMX began developing a new chassis, making many changes to increase reliability. In 1961, they created a reinforced hull with armor up to 40 millimeters at rational angles of inclination up to 80 degrees. Bruno and Valette, meanwhile, experimented with armament. Blueprints of various turrets were created. Variants of installing different caliber guns were worked out. Prototypes were built for testing. What do you think it all ended with? The military continued testing both machines. Tanks were taken to proving grounds, fired from them, driven over rough terrain, maneuverability evaluated, speed, accuracy of fire, convenience for crew. Years passed, money was spent, prototypes were built, reports were written. But with each month it became more and more obvious. Something was going wrong. There was something fundamentally wrong with the very concept of an airborne tank destroyer. Bruno and Valette engineers began creating variants. The first, ELC EVH-30, received 2 30mm automatic cannons from Panhard. 2 autocannons were installed on both sides of the turret. 2 machine guns were placed slightly closer to the center. High-rate automatic cannons created dense fire against light vehicles and enemy infantry. The concept was logical. A tiny fast tank saturating the target with automatic fire. Appeared from behind a hill, shot up a column of trucks or infantry unit, disappeared. Guerrilla tactics on tracks. The second variant, ELC EV-90, went further. Instead of 2 small-caliber cannons and machine guns, engineers installed 1 90mm low-pressure Defa gun on the right side of the turret. Now the tiny tank could fight real enemy tanks. The military nodded. The concept works. Modularity proves its usefulness. One day the tank fights infantry, another day destroys enemy tanks. Just change the turret and you're done. But Bruno and Valette engineers clearly weren't going to stop. They created a third variant, and here real madness began, ELC even 120. On a tank 1.5 meters high and weighing less than 7 tons, they proposed installing 4 120mm caliber recoilless rifles. 2 guns on the right, 2 on the left in horizontal pairs. This looked absurd, as if someone took a child's toy and attached an artillery battery to it. Barrels stuck out from the turret like ears on a deranged rabbit. A tank the size of a passenger car, and 4 huge cannons hang on it. Designers claimed that the gunner could reload all 4 guns without going outside. For this, they came up with a clever system. The driver had to either turn the turret to open the hatch and insert new shells without leaving his place, or climb out and reload standing next to the tank. A variant was even proposed with cut rear parts of the barrels so they could be turned inside the turret for reloading. A salvo from 4 120mm guns would destroy any tank guaranteed. On paper it sounded impressive. In reality, 4 recoilless rifles firing simultaneously from a 7-ton platform should have either overturned the tank or torn its structure apart from vibration. And now, the most interesting part. The military became doubtful because engineers proposed another variant, only 2 120mm guns, but each with a 5-round automatic loader of revolver type. Automatic reloading, 10 shots without stopping. This version was never built. Apparently, even French engineers realized they'd gone too far. 2 automatic 120mm guns on a 7-ton tank. This was already outright madness. But the fantasy didn't end. They proposed a variant with anti-tank guided missiles, 4 HEM SS-11 or 2 larger SS-12 on a special flat turret. For the 50s, this was advanced weaponry. Guided missiles were just entering military practice. In total, Brunon-Valette manufactured 10 pre-production units with various armaments. Each variant was actively tested. The military wanted to understand what worked better: automatic cannons, anti-tank gun, recoilless rifles, missiles. When firing the 90mm gun, the entire tank shook from recoil. Aiming was immediately disrupted. Accurate shooting was only possible from a stationary position. Moreover, after each shot, the gun had to be re-aimed at the target, and the version with 120mm recoilless rifles behaved unpredictably. When all 4 barrels fired simultaneously, the tank literally jumped in place. Reactive jets from the rear parts of the recoilless rifles raised huge clouds of dust and immediately revealed the position. After a salvo, the crew saw nothing in a cloud of smoke and dust, while the enemy could clearly see where the shots came from. Next salvo only after the dust settles, and that's time. Time during which the enemy manages to shoot back. 12.7mm caliber machine guns pierced the tank from any distance. 15mm of armor in front, 10mm on the sides. This isn't protection, it's symbolic. High explosive fragmentation shells turned the hull into a sieve. One hitting mortar shell, and the crew received multiple wounds from fragments that pierced the armor right through. The military understood the tank is fast and inconspicuous, armament is powerful, but it's absolutely unprotected. This is a self-propelled gun with symbolic armor. The first serious battle, and the crew dies from a machine gun burst. Testing continued, new prototypes were built, reports were written, but results remained disappointing. Each armament variant had fatal flaws. 30mm cannons couldn't penetrate tank armor. The 90mm gun disrupted aiming after each shot. 4 120mm guns revealed the tank, with a cloud of dust after the first salvo. And most importantly, no armament solved the main problem. The tank remained a tin box that any heavy machine gun could pierce. By the end of the 50s, it became completely clear the ELC program had failed. No armament variant could turn a 7-ton tin box into an effective combat vehicle. In 1958, dramatic events occurred in France. On May 13, the French army in Algeria raised a mutiny against civilian authorities. The government of the Fourth Republic collapsed. Charles de Gaulle returned to power. On September 28, 1958, the French approved a new constitution in a referendum. almost 80% of votes. The Fourth Republic died. The Fifth was born. On December 21, de Gaulle became president. The new president understood reality. The colonial empire was collapsing irreversibly. A guerrilla war was going on in Algeria in the mountains and deserts. There were no tank battles there. Tank destroyers weighing 6 tons weren't needed there. At the end of 1961, the Ministry of Defense closed the Engin de Combat program. Official wording: the project was recognized as having little promise. Instead of experimental tanks, they decided to improve the proven AMX-13. Several prototypes were sent to museums. The AMX ELC buys still stands in the Tank Museum of the city of Sorma. Brune and Valette prototypes were preserved in storage and private collections. Algeria gained independence in 1962 after 8 years of war. The program consumed 10 years of work and millions of francs. Result: museum exhibits, but the story has an unexpected ending. Half a century later, the small French tank gained a second life in the computer game world of tanks. The ELC even 90 became a cult machine. Players nicknamed it Yoka, Christmas tree, tiny, fast, with a powerful gun, exactly as its creators envisioned it. In the virtual world, the tank finally received the application that it was never destined to find in reality. Grandiose engineering ambitions crashed against the harsh reality of war and politics. Small tank destroyers remained only a reminder of this. Subscribe to the channel to learn about other absurd military projects. And remember, sometimes the craziest ideas become legends.